It's easy. It has fun and shady. Put into microphone. I'm just naturally this loud. So, without further ado, if I could get some assistance with turning off some of the lights, please. Yeah. Thank you. Gabby, do you need one off? Okay. Then it's time to do in the now our speaker for this month, Mike Fong. Right. So here, let's get the so you hit the yeah, and then the dot.
Welcome and thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for being friendly, talking to me. Sounds like a lot of you concern yourself with elevation here, which is perfect because I will talk about elevation also. So this talk may be a little different. I'm not going to talk about orchid growing. I'm going to take you on an adventure. And it's an adventure I took actually 10 years to the day through the weeks of, through December 26th through about January 12th. So this has been a nice trip down memory lane, revisiting why I went, kind of rethinking some of the events that happened. So the talk is titled The Secret in the Plants. there's a lot of, I think, lessons to be learned in growing plants. And by lessons, it could be plants, but I think we also learn about a lot about ourselves as well. So let me set the stage for you. I'm sorry the type looks a little small because I can barely read it. But I think we've all been there before, where life has just taken you down a path that hasn't been the funnest of paths. You experience burnout, emotional collapse, disconnect between yourself. Unfortunately, when it happens with people who grow plants, what happens to the plants when we aren't doing too well? They are often the first to suffer. So oftentimes it's because those plants define us, and I think something that you all could agree on is when we aren't doing our best and those plants are suffering, it's actually the extent of how much we're suffering, because as plant people, it's not very easy to just let a plant go. So I had one of those moments. It wasn't just one single moment, it was a whole slew of moments. It just felt like life decided to, for lack of a better word, take a dump on me, which I'm sure we've all had moments like that as well. So I decided to do what any logical person would do. The plants were my enemy. They were also a reason for my distress because they needed attention. I didn't have the time to take care of them. So the best I could do was run away from memories of some of those events which had happened to me, obligations, my plants, my family, and I needed to go look for something. And that was a search for forgiveness, control or surrendering to a lack of control, self, and my passion again. All too often, doors close that we think were intended for us to go through. But there's probably good reasons why those doors close. So where did I run away to? I ran away to Ecuador. And I ran away right after Christmas 2015, and I just decided to get the hell out of Dodge. Ticket prices were very cheap then too, so that's pretty amazing. To our right, we see Basilica del Voto Nacional. There was a lot of symbols, at least for me, when going there. Ecuador and Catholicism kind of go hand in hand. So it was interesting that I found myself visiting a lot of these places, not necessarily because of the religious context, but because the building and architecture was just amazing. So I flew into Quito. Quito is a high elevation city in the Andes. Elevation 9,000.
I guess this is slideshow there. Keep Pluto. Every time, I don't know. It just it just fell out. Now I can't get the voice going. Come on. Video. Muted. I don't know why. There's no. Let me just tap on the orbit again. Well, they are showing a slideshow, which is good. I just don't know why. Stacy, I can't get the. Get the sound. Video. Not muted. Let me go out and look. Burning effigies on screen now. There's nothing else I can touch on here that has anything to do with volume. Well, I did that. Nothing. It says AirPlay.
liver flukes. Shouldn't have done that. I did it anyways. I did only graze the top of the plant, and I also found wild rubus. So I grazed out in the field, which this is something I am known to do. I am known to pull plants out from outside and on hikes and tell my friends, eat this. And they say, no. And I said, no, eat it. They say no again. I said, no, eat it. Eventually they give in and they try it and they learn something new. So it was just nice that I recognized something in some place that purified. And this is the view from the top looking down at the canopy of the trees. Going this path here, I found this cool epidendrum species, saw some toucans, and then this really cool terrestrial orchid, Monophyllorchis maculata. Very beautiful plant. So we also, me and my friend Siggy, he hired a guide to take me out deeper into the forest because the ecotourist area, I'm like, well, this is kind of developed. This isn't really what I was thinking. And so this person took me out in the forest. He had an inkling and understanding that I was looking to see various orchids. So he said, oh yeah, I know where orchids are. Sure, I'll take you. What I didn't think he was going to do was say, let's walk up the stream, which eventually gives rise to the river. And then let's go ahead and go down the stream with ropes tethered to rocks. So this is the guide going down. The river is going down this way. It's maybe about 15 feet, 20 feet, not too much, but still, I'm thinking there's no cell service out here. If I fall and get injured, what will happen? I couldn't help but think, well, what if? But eventually I did it anyways. I'm like, I'm here. When will you have the opportunity to do this again? And I'm glad I did. So Look at this beautiful river, what it turned into with nice cascading falls. The water was really, really clear. But there's something else here which isn't really visible. Does anyone see anything else? Don't worry, I'll point it out in a moment. Didn't see any snakes, but I'm sure they're there. Looking at that same boulder, so we're looking here now, zooming in. I said, I see something there. So I started kind of maneuvering around the water, and turns out that it was a huge population of Phragmipedium piercii. I'm like, wait, I thought they were terrestrial, not lithophytes. Why are they growing on a damn concrete granite boulder? And as mentioned, or as people know, most frags are fairly, moisture-loving species, with the exception of Caudatum witzianum and I think Lindenii. So it was just interesting to see them so close to the water. Notice that it's not the upper portion of the water or upper portion of the rock, but the lower portion. These plants are being inundated at times. If not inundated, they're getting constant moisture from just spray of the water itself. So this was my first exciting find. For those of you who don't know me too well, which is probably all of you except Tom, I am a slipper orchid enthusiast. I have grown all of the genera with exception of one that looks like a Selenopedium, but it's without a pouch called Apedium, which I'm like, it's still a Selenopedium, but I've grown all of them. Here's me just relishing in that moment, enjoying it, just like, this is so exciting, so cool. It parallels kind of how you find some Cypripediums in North America. Cypripedium californicum grows in streams. It grows with constant water flow with an insectivorous plant known as Darlingtonia californica. So I made my way into Banos. The climate here was amazing. It was comfortable. I wasn't cold. It wasn't overly wet. It was nice. It was pleasant. You could walk around in shorts. You weren't sweating. And things to note here, and this is 10 years ago, the US dollar goes a long way there. And I'll come back to that thought in a moment. I spent a day in recovery and just kind of fine living. And by fine living, I mean, they had massages for an hour that were like $10. I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to get 2 massages a day. I'm going to eat out at many of the different restaurants, and the food there was pretty amazing too. And pictured here is a really small epidendrum. I've asked Yvonne from Ecuador, in addition to Pepe, hey, what's the name of the species? Because it's really, really cool. A tiny epidendrum growing as a twig epiphyte. Tom, if you recognize any of these plants, let me know. You'll know quickly also something throughout this presentation. I don't have too many pictures of buildings because that's not what I'm looking at when I'm going to different places. I'm looking at the ground, I'm looking at the trees, I'm looking at nature. So I had to steal this picture. This was from Pinterest, but this kind of illustrates some of the views from the city. This is the downtown area. Waterfalls abound and surround the city itself, and they have beautiful gardens there too. So I took my time really taking in the city because it felt very comfortable to me. But they also left nature intact. I was able to go just a couple of feet, on the periphery of the city and find different types of terrestrial orchids. Here we have some type of aspidogeny. I believe it might be Querciticola. This one, I've asked Mark Hatchadorian at the New York Botanical Gardens, what is it? It's interesting because if you know orchids enough, you kind of get a sense of what is it orchidaceous and what is an orchid, what is not an orchid. And I know this is an orchid. It didn't have flowers. When I kind of inspected it closer, I picked the stem, and it was a running stem on the ground, and it had roots that had velamen on it, which further suggests that this is something in the orchid family. No flowers, so of course, without flowers, it's kind of like you're just stabbing in the dark as to what it is. Next picture here, we have a couple of terrestrial orchids. Again, I don't know what, not a lot of flowers, but they were definitely orchids. Another terrestrial orchid, likely a habenaria, which is a pretty large genus, and I believe Rusty Exotics came and spoke to you on habenarias a while ago. And then I did something really, really stupid. Let me explain. So I'm walking through the city of Banos, and this guy comes up to me and says, "You want to jump on the bridge?" And I'm like, "Oh, is this bungee jumping?" I'm like, I guess. So he said, "Oh, just go back over there." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And basically, he's directing me to the storefront where I have to pay for this experience. So I put on this harness and get on the bridge, and these people are taking pictures either because they think I'm a complete fool or they're actually genuinely interested at what's going to happen. I get on the bridge and I jump. This decision was made in less than 10 minutes. It's like, wow. And honestly, the thought that first came into my mind before I made that decision, what's the worst that could happen? So I was documenting this because internet is very good in Ecuador as well. And I was documenting my journeys on Facebook. And I posted this video, and a lot of my friends said, "Okay, that wasn't bungee jumping. There was no flex on that cord." I'm like, "Oh, huh, You could have cracked or snapped your neck." And like, could have, yeah. And it all made sense what they were telling me, but I did it anyway. Next adventure. I wanted to do something exciting, something really cool. And what's more exciting, and you probably saw in the news, I guess a couple people are arrested for going into Volcano National Park, getting too close to the volcano and lava. I decided I want to climb a volcano that's erupting. Mind you, it's ambitious. This volcano is really hot. So there's very little chance of success here. I decided that I wanted to climb as far as I could. The Banos itself, I told you the elevation is around 5,900. The volcanoes at 16,400 or 16,480 feet. I made it to 12,000 feet. That was a long hike. And I didn't make it easily. This is how I made it up the hike. Every 5 minutes, I was just out of breath. That's how intense it was. But what kept me going was it was bona fide cloud forest, lichens everywhere, stunted vegetations, ericaceous stuff, meaning blueberries, epiphytic blueberries, terrestrial blueberries, and lots of orchids. Lots and lots of orchids, and I'll show you some of those pictures in a moment here. It was also fairly drizzly, windy, if not cold, and I couldn't stop going. And here you see the warning here, prohibited to ascend the volcano. I know, I'm breaking all the rules here. I said, well, there's no one out here. Who's going to enforce it? So I kept going. Orchid abundance dramatically increased here. Certicilum species, and I believe Mark Hatchadorian said Satifera species, which I'll show you in a moment, Encyclia species, Lepanthes, and Stelis. Stelis orchids, which is a pleurothallid, were probably the most abundant orchid, and you just found them everywhere. There were lots of aeroids and ericads too. I'll show you some of those pictures. Don't worry, it's not a lot of them, but I'm a botanist, so I also appreciate all plants. 7 hours later, I couldn't do it anymore. I'm just like, this is too much. One of the luxuries of hiking in Ecuador, though, because you're so close to the equator, does anyone know what that luxury is? 12-hour days. So the sun wasn't going anywhere. I just turned back because I'm like, I can't do it. And there were no vendors with coca leaves. Otherwise, I would have made it up that volcano. So exhausted, I decided to do something I would have never dreamed of doing in the United States. I said, I'm going to hitchhike. because I am not going all the way down. So I'm walking down, taking pictures of plants, and cars pass by. I'm just like this, because that's how they do it, right? I think. I eventually got a ride, but before doing so, I noticed a few different plants. Here we have one of these tropical blueberries. To my knowledge, all the tropical blueberries that you find, they are in a grouping of plants which are related to the vaccinium species that we all know and eat, which includes cranberries, blueberries, huckleberries, lingonberries, among others. They are edible. So here we have one of these epiphytic species. I was geo tagging places for memory and also to kind of indicate how. I didn't take the initial reading at Banos, I took it later that day. But here's the 12,406 feet, and there's the 6,253 feet that I started at. I was proud of myself. He gave it a try. Sandwiched in the middle was just this huge spray of something in the Oncidium alliance. They probably go by many different names now. I'm not going to say something which is probably going to be incorrect, but if I was willing to step out on a limb and say what it was, it would be odontogloss or something like that. You have some of these Anthurium species. This is Anthurium. Many of these from Ecuador before, and they just tap out on me. But after visiting them in their native habitat, it makes sense. Constant air movement, really cool temperatures. Elaphoglossum species, this really cool epidendrum. To this day, I don't have an ID on it, but just the golden color of the flowers were pretty remarkable. Some lower vascular plants. They're a fun group to me, but this is a Lycopodium or Composio now. And then this is the Satifra. At first glance, I thought it was an Elianthus, which are related to Sobralias, but what was interesting about this plant, it had multiple spikes that came off the side of the actual stem itself. And that's where Mark Hatchabilian corrected this and said it's Satifra or Satidra. And every time I Google it, I don't find information on it. So I'm not sure still what this was. Here you have a very dainty Lepanthes. Notice the moss festooned on this branch itself. So many different mosses there. Various Elianthus up there, some orange ones or some pink ones, which here's the pink one itself. Other Pleurothallus, this is Pleurothallus likely, and then here's another Pleurothallus. Again, sorry for no identifications, but the plants just became so numerous. I took so many pictures. It's like, you know what, I'm not going to sit here all day and try to identify it. I'm going to take a picture, run, and go to the next plant. No. It's unfortunate. Someone should get on that. Other Pleurothallus species, some Stromeria relatives. I think this is Glomeria. Some terrestrial orchids blooming. And then I told you how the US dollar went a long way, right? After that hike, I was hungry, and I mean hungry. And throughout this whole ordeal, my appetite had been gone. For, I guess, reference, I lost about 25 pounds in 3 weeks during that event that happened. Not in Ecuador. This was before I went to Ecuador. But my appetite was coming back. And so I bought this 4-course meal for only $20. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm eating it all. And Italian food in Ecuador, I know, sounds weird, but it tasted authentic to me. So some lasagna, minestrone, what do they call this again? Thank you. And tiramisu, which I could still taste it right now. My next stop at the Banos, I ended up messaging Yvonne from Ecuador. I'll talk more about their family in a moment here. I ended up messaging him, say, Yvonne, I'm here, I'm in Banos. Do you want to meet up? And I've known Yvonne and family for a long time. I probably met them sometime when I was 12 or 13. I met Pepe first, and then I've known Yvonne for a very long time. We, would do the Pacific Orchid Exposition together. That is, he would bring his plants and he would say, "Do you want to help?" And by help, when I agreed to say yes, what I meant is, "I'll help you unbox your plants and put aside what it is I want." Which he was fine with that. He got the help, I got the plants, and it all worked out. So this is Yvonne, his wife Priscilla, and kids who are also now into the orchid business. So it is a family business. So as mentioned, they are of Ecuador. He invited me into his family's home. Don't tell him this, but they set me up in his little girl's room, and there was stuffed animals everywhere, and I was a little afraid. He wanted to show me his commute to work one of these days. We spent some time in Cuenca, sightseeing, looking around, showing me kind of some of the local cuisine, museums. Again, not really my interest. If you're taking a trip to Ecuador, see it though. You're seeing my own biases right now. So from Cuenca, he needed to get to El Pengue, which is over the Andes. And it's a long, arduous ride, stops, and it took about 5.5 hours to get there. So this was one of the few ways into the Amazon basin, at least to get to his nursery in El Pengue. Ecuador, family-owned business. They also took me to a family celebration. It was one of the kids' birthdays, which it's just unique to kind of see a family, especially a Latin American family. You know, I do have Latin American roots, so interact with each other. All of them know each other. It's loud, it's boisterous, but everyone is having a good time, and there's lots of love there. We made it to his nursery. I'm not going to show you too many pictures. You know why? Because if you go into Ecuador, I'm not an employee. You can look at their pictures. And I think I talked to one of you earlier about one of the plants that you have at home that you got from them. They have a very good digital library of some of the plants that they've sold in the past. But what kind of interested me most was how they grew some of the Phragmipediums. This is Phragmipedium richteri, excuse me, not Phragmipedium richteri, Phragmipedium hertzii. And they just had it growing in the ground. Like, what? Why do I go through too many steps to try to accommodate these plants and you're just putting them in the ground? Lepanthes caladiction, which you folks may have seen either in journals or whatnot, or perhaps even have imported some yourself. People say that these are dainty little plants that you have to protect, and they need high humidity. And what I ended up seeing is that he had many different Lepanthes species, including Telepagona flora, just mounted on walls. And they seemed dry to me. Mind you, the humidity is high outside, I guess. It seemed warmer than I probably would have grown them, but there they were, just growing in numbers, I mean, by the hundreds. A very tall Subraria caligrassa, with Phragmipedium longifolium. Here's their seed operations. All these are little seedlings. So some of the seeds that, or plants that they bring in are grown from these plants here. It is a huge family operation. I've met nieces, nephews, cousins, a lot of relatives at these different orchid shows in the US from Ecuador representing him. So let me see, did I put it here? I may have put it here, one moment. I did not put the elevation of El Pengue, but I believe it's at like 1,800 feet. So lower elevation, but still not the hottest that it could be. This is a commute from Cuenca to El Pengue, up for the Andes Mountains. Right at the very top of this dirt road, as he was driving, we came across a shrine with the Virgin Mary. Yvonne stopped, and he got out of the car, and he said a prayer. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And looking back, I kind of understand why he did now. On our way back, it was nighttime, and it was pouring. We were out looking for plants. A little bit maybe too dark, but we almost went off the side of the road. We just looked at each other, and I realized that, I mean, the reason he stopped was very important, but still quite the adventure. One of the treats that he took me on, because he also saw that the nursery wasn't really the experience I was looking for, he understood that he wants to get out in the field and see plants growing. He took me to see Phragmipedium bessiae, and he didn't tell me. You know, they also say it's a terrestrial orchid. Interestingly enough, Phragmipedium bessiae grows on rocks. It grows on rocks that are sopping wet with this green, thick algae, and they're rooted into that algae. So here's Yvonne, Phragmipedium bessiae in the background. Here's me with the Phragmipedium bessiae holding on for dear life because it was slippery as heck. And then here's some of the Phragmipedium bessiae flowers that we saw there. Apparently, there's a couple of varieties. And what I was trying to illustrate here is that two of the varieties that they offer have ranges that overlap, and they also bloom at the same time, which means that there's gene flow likely, and they're probably not distinct varieties, but that's different discussion, different time. He also took me to saw Phragmipedium reticulatum. Yes, we were taking pictures in the dark. It was getting late. He was trying to show me as much as possible, so we were just driving around these dirt roads looking for plants. So, Sobralias. Some of them are very pricey plants. What you find out about Sobralias quickly is Sobralias are pretty weedy plants. They grow in ditches, they grow on the side of the road, they grow in disturbed areas, and they don't seem to fuss much. So excited to see stuff like this. Phragmipedium on rocks, finding a plant which reminds you of home. Just weird events that made me laugh during that time. This was kind of towards the tail end. My time's wrapping up. I'm trying to fit in as much as possible. Believe it or not, jumping off bridges. I think just doing new things to kind of get me out of that funk. And then I think lastly, kind of just expecting and accepting the unexpected. That's life. And I think all too often we latch on to these ideas of potential or where doors could lead, paths could take us. And when we have those expectations, oftentimes we get let down. So I started to appreciate this a little more, which leads kind of towards the tail end here. I started with saying that plants can teach us a lot. They teach us that there is adaptation over perfection. There is persistence without certainty, and there is growth in hard places. Plants, like us, have the same problems like us, just a different context. Here's one of those hard places. This was a rock that I took a picture of. And I'm sorry that the pictures are so dim and don't show up really well, but this rock had a lot of different orchids on it. Some maxillarias, some sobralias, some elaphoglossum, which is a fern, but it had many other orchids in just a very small area. Somewhere along the way, I started kind of rediscovering purpose. I kind of snapped out of it a little. It wasn't about achievement. It wasn't about control. It was about relationship and care. This is what we have with our plants. We form a relationship. It's not, well, actually, I take it back. Maybe it's like the best kind of ideal relationship because, as mentioned to Jill earlier, plants don't talk back to you. They just die, which is an ideal situation sometimes. Leaving Ecuador, I wasn't healed. No way after what happened. But I wasn't finished either. And I felt grounded. And to illustrate that, I told you I jumped off that bridge. I couldn't take this damn smile on my face. Why am I smiling? I basically almost snapped my neck, but it was fun. And I can't remember a time that I actually genuinely just smiled without feeling like, am I smiling too much? Why is it hurting? This doesn't feel normal. This was me smiling. So I came home with a lot lighter baggage. I had more patience for myself in life, more grace for missteps, and willingness to try again. I almost didn't come back. I almost said, just leave it all. Stay here, you're happy. You could see plants, you could explore, everything's new to you. But I'll get to that last thought in a moment, why I couldn't do that. Some of the secrets that we learn from plants is plants don't rush. They persist. Growth begins underground. Sometimes the most important growth is, as many of you know, at the root level. If the roots aren't doing well, your plant's not doing well. But often, we don't look at what's happening underneath. Survival is adaptation, not force. You can't make life bend at your will. You have to be able to accommodate it. And then care changes outcomes. If something's not working for your plant, change the environment. Something's not working for you, change the environment. They teach us to expect the unexpected. Sometimes a plant dies and it's like, I just looked at you, why did you die? They do what they want to do sometimes. We do what we want to do sometimes. Lastly, wild places and plants don't fix us. They remind us how to live. So, if you want to know how I got to Ecuador, you're going to have to go to Hilo. This is part 2 of the story. Part 1 will be told in Hilo. So thank you, folks. I appreciate you listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed it.
And not easy.
Did you go to the Galapagos too over there or no?
So I spent 3 weeks there, and I was just out every single day. I think if I were to go back to Ecuador, I would take at least a month,
Oh my
not more.
gosh.
There's just so much to see, and I so badly wanted to take a picture on the glacier, but the Galapagos too. Some biologists had discussions.
Any artists there at the Galapagos?
What's that?
Any artists?
Tom, have you heard something about this? Yeah, there's a few things. But there's a place, you don't actually have to go to the Galapagos to get the Galapagos experience. There's a place called, well, like, I don't actually remember the name of it. It's on the mainland. And it's right on the ocean, and you can see almost everything you can see on the Galapagos there. Email me and I'll give you this. Awesome.
Do you have a talk on the Galapagos? Your name on
I'll be